Dear members of the Soul Stories family, today we will bring you a romantic love story, so let's get started. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any meaningful stories. Rain poured down as if it meant to drown the world, turning everything beyond Grace Miller's windshield into a smeared painting. The GPS had given up half a mile back, leaving her to wrestle with the twisting roads of Greenwich, Connecticut, guided only by blurry house numbers under streetlights. It was nearly midnight, and Grace was exhausted, her navy blazer soaked and clinging to her like a second skin. But the stack of documents on the passenger seat, schedules and contractor agreements for Hayes Corporation's charity gala, had to be delivered tonight. Her boss had been clear, her voice icy over the phone. "No mistakes, Grace. This is our biggest client." Grace muttered a curse as she pulled up to a villa she hoped was the right address. The building loomed through the rain, a modern structure with floor-to-ceiling glass, its faint golden light struggling against the darkness. The house number on the gate was nearly illegible, blurred by the storm, but it looked close to the scrawled digits in her notebook. She grabbed the documents, tucking them under her coat to shield them from the rain, and dashed out, her heels slipping on the wet stone path. The cold wind cut through her, but she gritted her teeth, determined to finish this and get home to sleep. Inside the villa, Eric Hayes sat alone in a leather armchair, a half-empty bottle of whiskey glinting on the ebony table beside him. The room was shrouded in darkness, with only the flickering light of a table lamp illuminating his angular face. High nose, sharp jaw, and gray eyes as stormy as the sky outside. In his hand, he clutched an old photo, its edges worn from too much handling. Elena smiled in the picture, her dark hair loose, her eyes gentle as if looking right at him. 2 years ago, she'd been taken in a car accident. The screech of tires, twisted metal, and his world had collapsed. The memory tore at him, as raw as the first day. He poured another glass of whiskey, the liquid burning down his throat but doing nothing to ease the emptiness in his chest. Grace pounded on the villa's door, shivering as rain dripped from her soaked hair. No one answered. She frowned, tried the handle. Surprisingly, it was unlocked. "Hello?" she called, pushing the door open and stepping into the foyer. Her voice echoed across the cold marble floor. The place felt more like a museum than a home, with sharp lines, minimalist furniture, and a distant elegance. The scent of polished wood mingled with the rain clinging to her. She hesitated, glancing at the documents in her hand, then ventured deeper inside. "I'm from Starline Events," she called louder, her voice trembling slightly from the cold. "I've got the gala documents." In the living room, Eric froze at the sound of her voice. It was soft but resolute, like a melody he hadn't heard in years. He set the whiskey down, stood, his legs unsteady from the alcohol. He stepped into the hallway, his tall frame casting a long shadow under the dim light. When he saw her standing there, dark hair plastered to her face, coat drenched, brown eyes sharp with wariness, he stopped breathing. His heart pounded, a painful jolt. She looked so much like Elena. The same delicate cheekbones, full lips, slender frame. Elena. The whiskey and grief clouded his judgment, and he didn't think twice. He needed her. Needed to know she was real. Grace turned at the sound of footsteps, expecting an assistant or butler to take the documents. But the man who appeared made her freeze. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a rumpled white shirt with sleeves rolled up, revealing strong forearms. His gray eyes locked onto her, as if she were the only thing left in the world. His expression was a strange mix, pain, disbelief, and a hunger she couldn't fathom. Before she could speak, he was in front of her in 3 strides. "Elena," he whispered, his voice breaking like it might dissolve. He reached out, his trembling fingers brushing her cheek, cold but gentle. "I've missed you so much." Grace went rigid, her mind reeling. Who was Elena? She opened her mouth to ask, but his lips were on hers, fierce and desperate, as if he were trying to hold on to a fading dream. The kiss was searing, laced with whiskey and a pain she could feel. For a split second she was stunned, his warmth a stark contrast to the cold seeping into her skin. Then reality hit like a fist. She shoved him back with all her strength, her hand swinging up to slap him hard across the face. The sound cracked through the silent room like a gunshot. "Don't you dare touch me!" she shouted, her voice shaking with rage. Her chest heaved, adrenaline surging, her hands stinging from the blow. She wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, as if she could erase the feel of his lips. Her eyes blazed with fury, glaring at him like she could burn him down. Eric staggered, her slap cutting through his haze like a blade. He touched his cheek, where his skin stung, and stared at her, eyes wide, confusion replacing the frantic longing. I I thought, he stammered, his voice faltering. He realized his mistake, but his mind was still spinning, unable to process her standing there. Not Elena, but so painfully similar. "Stay away from me," Grace snapped, clutching the documents like a shield. She didn't care who he was, didn't care about his story. No one crossed her boundaries like that. She turned, bolting for the door, her heels slipping on the wet floor. The rain swallowed her as she ran to her car, hands shaking as she fumbled for her keys. She threw herself into the driver's seat, started the engine, and sped off, never looking back. Her heart pounded, a mix of anger and confusion, but she vowed not to let this haunt her. Inside the villa, Eric stood frozen, her slap still burning on his cheek. The room felt emptier now, the silence crushing. He sank onto the sofa, cradling his head, trying to make sense of what had happened. She wasn't Elena. Of course she wasn't. Elena was gone forever, and he'd just done something unforgivable, assaulting a stranger because of his own pain. Shame coiled in his gut, but another feeling, small but sharp, crept into his mind. Her eyes, dark brown, blazing with defiance, stood out vividly. She'd looked at him like he was nothing, but the fire in her gaze had stirred something he hadn't felt in years. Not love, not yet, but a spark, a crack in the darkness that had trapped him for 2 years. He picked up Elena's photo from the table, his fingers tracing her smile. But for the first time, her memory didn't fully hold him. His mind drifted to the woman who'd just left, her fierceness a stark contrast to Elena's gentleness. Who was she? He didn't know her name, knew nothing but those eyes and the slap that shook him awake. But he needed to find out. The thought unsettled him, like a match flaring in a long dark room. He leaned back on the sofa, staring at the ceiling, knowing sleep wouldn't come tonight. Miles away in her small Brooklyn apartment, Grace stripped off her soaked clothes and stood under a scalding shower, steam rising around her. She scrubbed her skin hard, as if she could wash away the night, the rain, the cold, and especially the feel of his lips on hers. Her mouth still tingled, and it only fueled her anger. Who did he think he was, grabbing her, kissing her like that? And who was Elena? An ex he couldn't let go of? A wife he'd lost? She didn't care. She wasn't here to be anyone's stand-in, and she wouldn't let some man unravel her self-control. Wrapped in a towel, she dropped onto her sofa, the damp documents on the coffee table. In her haste, she dropped them on the villa's floor, and she had no intention of going back. Tomorrow she'd tell her boss the delivery was done and find a way to forget this. New York was a big city, big enough that she'd never have to see him again. She closed her eyes, trying to force herself to relax, but his image intruded unbidden. Those haunting gray eyes, his broken voice calling Elena's name. There was pain there, deep and real, like an open wound. She pushed the thought away, almost angry at herself for noticing. Pain wasn't an excuse for what he did. She wasn't that woman, and she'd never be her. Grace fell into a fitful sleep, her dreams a chaotic mix. Rain, gray eyes, and the feel of his lips on hers. Across the city, Eric lay awake, staring at the ceiling. For the first time in 2 years, his pain felt different. Not lighter, but shifting, like a door creaking open in his soul. He didn't know why, but he couldn't forget her. The woman who wasn't Elena, who'd stormed into his life like a hurricane and left everything in disarray. He clenched his fists, guilt and a strange longing intertwining, unaware that this moment had already bound their fates. Grace, with her anger and resolve, swore to move on, chalking tonight up as a forgettable mishap. Eric, torn between shame and a faint glimmer of hope, felt the first stirrings of something he wasn't ready to name. The storm outside had passed, but it had left another storm brewing in their hearts, and neither knew how profoundly it would change their lives. The next morning, New York's sunlight filtered through the skyscrapers, spilling into Grace's small office at Starline Events' Manhattan headquarters. She sat at her desk, a cold coffee in hand, eyes fixed on her laptop screen, but her mind elsewhere. Last night, the rain, the slap, and the man with haunting eyes clung to her like a shadow that wouldn't fade. She shook her head, telling herself to focus. Today was critical. Her boss, Linda, would announce a new project, and Grace needed to prove she deserved the lead event planner role. She adjusted her blazer, took a deep breath, and headed to the meeting room. The meeting room was bright, with a long glass table and a view of the city skyline. Her colleagues were already seated, whispering about the new client. Linda, a sharp woman in her 50s with short silver hair and a commanding presence, stood at the head of the table, holding a stack of documents. "Everyone," she began, her voice carrying authority, "I'm proud to announce that Starline has secured a contract with Hayes Corporation for their annual gala. This is our biggest opportunity yet." Grace smiled, a mix of pride and pressure swelling in her chest. Hayes Corporation was a financial empire, and their gala wasn't just an event, it was a statement of power. She was picturing elegant venues and high-profile sponsors when Linda's gaze locked onto her. "Grace, you'll lead this project. Hayes Corporation's CEO, Eric Hayes, personally requested you as the primary contact." The world seemed to stop. Grace blinked, her smile freezing on her face. Eric Hayes. His name rang in her head like an alarm. It couldn't be. Not the man from last night, the one who kissed her in a drunken stupor, the one she'd slapped hard. She clenched her fists under the table, struggling to keep her composure. Thank you," she managed, her voice slightly hoarse. But inside, she wanted to bolt from the room. Linda nodded, moving on to other details, but Grace heard nothing. All she could see were those gray eyes staring at her like they could consume her. After the meeting, Grace rushed back to her desk, slammed her office door, and called Linda. "Ms. Linda, I'm honored, but I think someone else might be better suited for this project," she said, trying to sound calm. Linda cut her off over the phone. "Grace, this isn't a request. It's your chance to shine. Hayes Corporation is paying millions for this gala, and Eric Hayes specifically named you. If you back out, the company suffers. Understood?" Grace bit her lip, feeling cornered. She wanted to tell Linda about last night, about Eric's disgusting behavior, but something stopped her. Maybe fear of judgment, or worse, being seen as unprofessional. She took a deep breath, nodding, though Linda couldn't see. "Yes, I understand. I'll do it." But as she hung up, she lightly punched her desk, muttering to herself, "Damn it." A few miles away in the top-floor office of Hayes Corporation's headquarters, Eric sat behind a walnut desk, gazing at New York's skyline. His tailored gray suit fit him perfectly, but his eyes were tired, as if last night had never ended. In front of him was a file on Starline Events, with Grace Miller's profile on top. Her photo didn't look like Elena. Not exactly. Grace's smile was sharper, her eyes confident, lacking Elena's fragile gentleness. But last night, in the dim light and his drunken haze, he'd been mistaken. And her slap, those blazing eyes, had burned into his memory. Eric told himself he'd chosen her for business reasons. Grace was Starline's best, according to their reviews, and he needed the best for the gala. But deep down, he knew the truth. He wanted to see her again, to understand why she'd made his heart beat after 2 years of numbness. He wasn't sure what it was, obsession, guilt, or something else. But he needed to know, if only to close the chapter with Elena. He tapped his fingers on the desk, his gaze distant, then called his assistant. "Schedule a meeting with Starline for Wednesday. I want Grace Miller there." The first meeting took place at a luxurious midtown hotel, the gala's venue. Grace arrived early, reviewing her notes, trying to act normal despite her racing heart. She wore a sleek black business dress, her hair pulled up, determined to keep things professional. When the Hayes Corporation team walked in, she stood tall, offering a polite smile, until she saw Eric. He wore a black suit, his hair neatly combed, but those gray eyes were still piercing, locked on her like they had been that night. She tightened her grip on her pen, refusing to let his gaze shake her. Ms. Miller, Eric said, his voice low and composed as if nothing had happened. He shook her hand, the brief touch enough to make her flinch. I look forward to working with you. Grace nodded, her voice clipped. Thank you, Mr. Hayes. I'll ensure the gala's success. She pulled her hand back quickly, turning to her colleagues to avoid his eyes. Throughout the meeting, she focused on presenting her plans. Venue, lighting, menu, with the sharp confidence that had earned her this role. But she felt Eric's gaze, always on her, never wavering. It unnerved her, like he was searching for something she didn't want to give. After the meeting, Eric unexpectedly suggested, Ms. Miller, I'd like you to walk through the venue with me this afternoon. There are details I need to see in person. Grace wanted to refuse, but the looks from her colleagues and boss made her nod. Yes, that's fine. That afternoon at the hotel, Grace joined Eric and a male colleague, Mark, who was always trying to impress her. Mark was a typical New Yorker, confident, talkative, and not shy about flirting. As they inspected the ballroom, Mark leaned close to Grace, pointing to a corner and saying with a teasing grin, I bet you could turn this into an epic dance floor, as long as you agree to dance with me. Grace gave a faint smile, responding professionally. Mark, I plan parties, not dance at them. But she noticed Eric standing a few feet away watching them. His hand tightened around his phone, his jaw clenched, his eyes darkening like the sky before a storm. He said nothing, turning away, but the jealousy in his glance was unmistakable. Grace frowned, confused and irritated. He had no right to be jealous. She ignored it, focusing on work. In the weeks that followed, Grace and Eric were forced to work closely. Late meetings, midnight emails, and venue visits. Grace kept her distance, maintaining a strictly professional tone, but Eric seemed determined to chip away at her walls. He brought her coffee during a meeting, remembering exactly how she liked it. Black, no sugar. He sought her opinion on every detail, from tablecloth colors to guest lists, as if her input was the only one that mattered. Those small gestures made her waver, though she hated admitting it. One evening, as the team stayed late to finalize plans, Grace and Eric were alone in the meeting room. Neon lights streamed through the window, highlighting the exhaustion on his face. They were reviewing the sponsor list when a colleague mentioned a charity named after Elena. Eric froze, his grip on his pen tightening, knuckles white. Grace glanced at him, catching the flicker of pain in his eyes. She didn't ask, but that moment made him seem vulnerable, not the powerful CEO or the reckless man from that night. As everyone left, Grace packed up, ready to go. Eric spoke suddenly, his voice low. You're doing an incredible job, Grace. I've never seen anyone handle pressure like you. She paused, looking at him, searching for mockery but finding only sincerity. Thank you, she replied, softer than she meant. In that moment, under the dim lights, she saw his loneliness, a lost man, not the one who'd crossed her boundaries. She stepped out into the chilly New York air, telling herself she'd keep her walls up, that Eric Hayes was just a client, nothing more. But as she rode the subway home, his image haunted her, his tired eyes, the way he'd gripped that pen. Why did his silence stir something in her? She shook her head, forcing the thought away, but a part of her knew the boundaries she'd built were starting to crack. The following weeks unfolded in a strange rhythm, as if Grace Miller and Eric Hayes were caught in a dance neither wanted to acknowledge. The Hayes Corporation Gala project grew increasingly intense, with long meetings and decisions that demanded quick resolution. Grace, with her sharp wit and impeccable organizational skills, became the team's linchpin, coordinating everything from guest lists to stage design. She worked with an almost ferocious focus, as if pouring her entire mind into the job would help her forget Eric's gaze. Always watching her, always making her feel like she was balancing on a thin wire. Eric, in his perfectly tailored suits, maintained the cool demeanor of a powerful CEO. He ran meetings with the precision of someone used to command, but with Grace, he was different. He no longer limited himself to small gestures like bringing her coffee or seeking her opinion. Now he found ways to extend their time together, a lingering question about lighting details, a suggestion to review plans at his office. Grace noticed, and each time she reinforced her walls, keeping things strictly professional. But those walls, though she wouldn't admit it, were starting to crack. One afternoon at the Midtown Hotel where the gala would take place, Grace was inspecting the stage setup when Eric appeared. She was debating with a contractor about the placement of spotlights, her voice sharp but reasoned, making the man nod repeatedly. Eric watched from a distance, the corner of his mouth twitching when she turned to a colleague and quipped about the lights looking like a spaceship landing in the wrong spot. The team's laughter rang out, and for the first time in 2 years, Eric laughed aloud, a deep, genuine sound that surprised even him. Grace turned, catching his gaze, and for a second, she forgot her walls. She smiled, not the polite smile of work, but a real one, making Eric's heart pound. "Something funny, Mr. Hayes?" she asked, her tone half teasing, half challenging, hands on her hips. Eric stepped closer, still wearing that rare smile. "I just never thought stage lights could be compared to a UFO, he replied, his eyes sparkling. Grace shrugged, turning away to hide the warmth creeping up her cheeks. "Takes a sense of humor to survive projects like this," she said, her voice softer than usual. That moment, brief but warm, made them both realize they were crossing the line of professionalism, and it was both terrifying and magnetic. But it wasn't always light moments. Eric's jealousy, once just fleeting glances, now burned hotter, like a smoldering fire waiting to ignite. During a meeting with investors at Hayes Corporation's office, Grace presented the final gala plans. She stood at the front of the room, confident and captivating, every gesture radiating competence. One investor, James Carver, a charming man in his 40s with a storied Wall Street reputation, listened intently. When Grace finished, James clapped, stood, and approached to shake her hand. "Outstanding, Ms. Miller," James said, his voice warm and smooth. "I rarely see someone present with such sharpness and charisma. Would you like to grab dinner tonight? We could discuss my sponsorship for the gala." His smile was bold, his eyes lingering on her unabashedly. Grace, used to such approaches in the industry, responded politely. "Thank you, Mr. Carver, but I think we can cover everything here." She kept her professional smile, but James persisted, handing her his card. "Call me James, and think about the invitation." Eric, seated at the head of the table, said nothing during the exchange, but his grip on his pen tightened, ink bleeding onto the paper. When the meeting ended, he stood abruptly, his voice icy. "Ms. Miller, I need you to stay and review the guest schedule. Now." Colleagues exchanged glances, sensing the tension, but no one dared ask. Grace frowned, knowing the schedule was finalized last week, but she nodded, not wanting to make a scene. In Eric's office, with a view of the Hudson River, he closed the door and faced her. "You shouldn't waste time with guys like Carver," he said, his voice low but sharp, his eyes darkening. Grace froze, then let out a dry laugh, crossing her arms. "Excuse me, Mr. Hayes, but you don't get to decide who I talk to. That's my job, not personal." She emphasized personal, a pointed reminder of that night, of the line he'd crossed. Eric stepped closer, just a few feet between them. "I know Carver. He doesn't care about the gala. He just wants—" He stopped, as if unwilling to finish. Grace lifted her chin, her eyes defiant. "Wants what? To flirt with me? That's not your business." Her heart raced, not from fear, but from the way he looked at her, like she was the only thing he wanted to hold on to. Eric took a deep breath, turning away, hands in his pockets. "Just be careful, okay?" His voice softened, almost pleading. Grace didn't respond, only turned and left. But as she stepped out, she felt her pulse racing. His jealousy, though it angered her, stirred something inexplicable in her. As the gala approached, the pressure mounted. One evening after the team had left, Grace and Eric stayed late in the office to finalize the VIP guest list. The meeting room was lit only by a desk lamp, filled with the soft clatter of Grace's typing. Eric sat across from her, reviewing documents, but his eyes kept drifting to her. When she slid her laptop toward him to check, their fingers brushed. Both froze, the air thickening. Grace pulled her hand back, coughing to break the silence. "Do you always work this late?" Eric asked, his voice low, as if just wanting to keep her there longer. Grace shrugged, not looking at him. "When it's needed, yeah. You're no different." She nodded at the stack of papers in front of him. Eric gave a faint smile, his gaze softer than usual. I'm used to it, but you're not like the others. Grace frowned, unsure what he meant. What's that supposed to mean? Eric hesitated, then said, his voice sincere, You're strong. You don't hesitate to push back on me. Most people just nod and follow. Grace laughed, for the first time at ease with him. Well, if you wanted a yes man, you picked the wrong person. Eric looked at her, his eyes glinting. I know, and I'm glad for it. The moment was interrupted when Eric's phone rang, a call from his assistant mentioning a charity named after Elena. He answered curtly, but Grace noticed his hand tighten around the phone, knuckles white. When he hung up, the room fell silent. Grace, for reasons she didn't understand, spoke up. That foundation, it means a lot to you, doesn't it? Eric looked at her, surprised, then nodded slowly. He stood, walking to the window, gazing at the city's twinkling lights. Elena, she died 2 years ago. Car accident. I wasn't there. I should have. His voice broke, and he stopped, his back to her. Grace felt her heart tighten. She didn't know what to say, but part of her wanted to understand him, to ease that pain. She stood, stepping closer but keeping her distance. I don't know what happened, she said softly. But from how you talk, she was important. You can't keep blaming yourself. Eric turned, his eyes raw with pain but also surprised. You don't have to say that, he whispered. Grace shrugged, trying to sound casual. I'm not great at comforting, but I know what it's like to be stuck in other people's expectations. It's like living for them, not yourself. Her words hung in the air, and in that moment, they looked at each other. Not as CEO and employee, but as two wounded people. Eric nodded, as if her words reached something deep inside him. Thank you, he said, his voice hoarse. Grace gave a faint smile, turning to pack up, but a thread had formed between them, fragile but undeniable. As Grace left the office, stepping into New York's chilly streets, a wave of emotions surged through her. She told herself to keep her distance, that Eric was a risk she couldn't afford. But his image, standing by the window, his voice breaking as he spoke of Elena, made it impossible to stay indifferent. Across the city, Eric sat in the empty office, staring at the spot Grace had left. For the first time, he admitted to himself that his feelings weren't because she resembled Elena. They were because she was Grace, the fierce, sharp woman challenging him to live again, even if he wasn't ready to name it. The air in the Midtown Hotel was stifling, despite the glittering crystal chandeliers and the soft piano music drifting through the banquet hall. With only 2 days until Hayes Corporation's annual gala, the Starline events team was in a frenzy preparing for the final rehearsal. Grace Miller moved through the crowd of staff, checking every detail, from table placements to stage lighting, with a focus as sharp as a blade. But beneath her professional exterior, her heart was in turmoil. Over the past weeks, she tried to maintain her boundaries with Eric Hayes, but every glance, every word from him chipped away at the wall she'd built. Now she felt them on the verge of collapse. Eric, in a fitted black suit, stood in a corner of the room, talking to a group of investors. But his eyes kept drifting to Grace. She wore a deep green business dress, her hair pulled up, every movement exuding the confidence he couldn't look away from. He knew he was losing control. His feelings for her, vivid, powerful, and entirely distinct from his memories of Elena, surged like a tidal wave, and he could no longer pretend they didn't exist. Tonight, he decided he would tell her the truth, even if it risked everything. Grace, while directing the lighting crew, felt Eric's gaze. She tried to ignore it, focusing on her work. But every time she glanced at him, she saw the tension in him, the way his hands clenched, the way his jaw tightened when someone mentioned her. She knew he was struggling, and it scared her. Not because of him, but because of herself. She'd let him slip into her mind, her heart, and that went against every rule she'd set. She didn't want to be Elena's stand-in, didn't want to fill a void in his life. The rehearsal ended late as New York City lights sparkled outside. The team trickled out, leaving Grace and Eric in the nearly empty banquet hall. She was reviewing the guest list on her tablet when Eric approached, his voice low but firm. Grace, we need to talk. She froze, her heart racing. She knew this moment was coming, but she wasn't ready. Now's not the time, Mr. Hayes, she replied, her voice stiff, eyes fixed on the screen. I have work to do. Grace, please, he said, stepping closer. His voice softened, almost pleading. 5 minutes. She took a deep breath, set the tablet down, and turned to face him. His gray eyes locked onto hers, brimming with emotion she didn't dare name. Fine, she said, crossing her arms like a shield. Talk. Eric hesitated, searching for words. He'd never felt this way, flustered, vulnerable, like a teenager facing a crush. I know I was wrong. That night at the villa, I shouldn't have done that. I mistook you for... He stopped, unwilling to say Elena's name, unwilling to let the past intrude on this moment. But these past weeks working with you, I realized something. I don't see you as anyone else. I see you, Grace. And I love you. His confession hit like a blow, making Grace step back. She shook her head, emotions surging, anger, fear, and a pain she didn't want to acknowledge. No, she cut in, her voice sharp as a knife. You don't love me, Eric. You're chasing a ghost. You look at me and see her. Elena, I'm not her, and I'll never be her. Eric froze as if she'd slapped him again. That's not true, he protested, stepping closer. I know you're not Elena. You're strong, sharp, witty. You're you, and that's why I... But Grace raised a hand, stopping him. Don't, she said, her voice trembling. I can't do this. I can't be a substitute, or whatever it is you're looking for. I have my self-respect, Eric. Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears, but she clenched her jaw, refusing to break. I'll finish the gala, but after that, I want out of this project. Her words stabbed Eric's heart. He stood there watching her, feeling the ground crumble beneath him. Grace, don't do this, he whispered, his voice hoarse. But she turned, striding out of the hall, leaving him alone in the dim light. The next morning, Grace emailed Linda, formally requesting to withdraw from the project after the gala. She cited personal reasons, but deep down, she knew the truth. She couldn't keep working with Eric, not when every moment with him tempted her to abandon reason. Linda, though displeased, agreed, warning that it could impact Grace's promotion prospects. Grace accepted, as long as she could keep her heart intact. Eric, upon hearing the news from Linda in a call, felt suffocated. He couldn't accept losing her, not over work, but because she was the only person who'd made him feel alive after 2 years of numbness. In a reckless move, he called an urgent meeting with Hayes Corporation's and Starline Events leadership. In the boardroom, to everyone's shock, he declared, if Grace Miller doesn't stay on this project, I'll cancel the contract with Starline, all of it. The room fell silent. Linda paled. Grace's colleagues exchanged stunned glances. Canceling the contract meant millions in losses, not to mention the hit to both companies' reputations. Grace, seated at the end of the table, felt blood rush to her head. She shot to her feet, her voice icy. What are you doing, Eric? This isn't a game. Eric looked straight at her, his gaze steady but pained. I'm not playing games, Grace. I'd rather lose this contract than lose you. His words rang out, not as a CEO, but as a man willing to risk everything. The room was stunned, but Grace felt her chest tighten. She turned, storming out of the meeting, saying nothing. The night before the gala, the final rehearsal unfolded in a tense atmosphere. Though Grace had requested to withdraw, she showed up to ensure everything was perfect. It was her responsibility, no matter how much her heart was breaking. She moved through the banquet hall, checking every detail, but her eyes kept drifting to Eric. He stood in a corner, talking to guests, but his gaze never left her. She tried to ignore it, focusing on work, but the weight of his stare made her tremble. As the rehearsal ended, a colleague, Tom, offered to drive Grace home. Tom was kind, always supportive during the project, and she agreed only because she didn't want to stay longer. As they walked out, Tom placed a hand lightly on her back, a friendly gesture, but enough for Eric, standing a few feet away, to notice. He froze, his grip tightening on his wine glass, his eyes darkening. But this time, he didn't intervene, didn't speak. He just stood there watching her leave, his gaze filled with pain, as if she were taking his heart with her. Grace, stepping outside, felt his stare. She glanced back just for a second and saw him standing motionless, his eyes saying something she didn't dare hear. Her heart ached, but she turned away, got into Tom's car, and left the hotel. In the car, she was silent, staring out the window, feeling like she'd left a piece of herself behind. The morning of the gala, Grace received a text from Eric, brief and simple. "Meet me before the gala, please." She hesitated, her finger hovering over the screen, but ultimately didn't reply. She arrived at the hotel early, checking everything one last time, determined to finish the job and leave. But as she stood alone in a waiting room, Eric appeared, closing the door behind him. "Grace," he said, his voice rough, stepping closer, "I can't let you go like this." She shook her head, trying to keep her voice steady. "Eric, stop. We can't keep doing this." But he didn't stop. He moved closer, so close she could smell his cologne, sandalwood and something warm. "I don't want to lose you," he said, his voice trembling. "Not because of Elena, but because of you. You're the one who makes me want to live again, Grace. I love you." His words were a knife, both painful and sweet. Grace felt her eyes sting, but she clenched her jaw, refusing to break. "I can't trust you," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I can't risk my heart for someone still haunted by the past." She turned, opened the door and walked out, leaving Eric alone in the empty room. As she left, her steps heavy in the hotel hallway, Grace felt her heart tearing in two. She wanted to believe him, to run into his arms, but the fear of being hurt, of being Elena's shadow, was too great. Behind her, Eric stood frozen, watching her disappear. He knew he might lose her forever, and that pain was sharper than anything he'd ever felt. The Hayes Corporation's annual gala unfolded like a dazzling dream. The Midtown Hotel's banquet hall shimmered with crystal chandeliers, elegant gowns and tailored suits gliding past each other to the gentle strains of jazz. Sponsors applauded as Eric Hayes took the stage, his speech concise but magnetic, thanking the team that brought the event to life. But when he mentioned Starline Events, his voice faltered for a moment, his eyes scanning the crowd for someone who wasn't there. Grace Miller had left as soon as she ensured everything was perfect, not staying for the praise or spotlight she deserved. In her small Brooklyn apartment, Grace sat on the sofa, a glass of red wine in hand. She'd shed her business dress for a t-shirt and yoga pants, her hair loose and messy over her shoulders. The TV played a mindless show, but she wasn't really watching. Her mind churned with what had happened, Eric's confession, the pain in his eyes as she turned away. She'd done the right thing, she told herself. She couldn't risk a love so fraught with danger, where she might only be Elena's shadow. But why even now did her heart ache at the thought of him? She sipped her wine, trying to banish those gray eyes, but they clung to her like an unforgettable melody. Across the city, Eric stood alone on his office balcony, gazing at New York's twinkling lights. The gala was a triumph, but he felt hollow. Grace's words, "You don't love me, you're chasing a ghost," echoed in his mind, each one a knife's twist. He'd pushed her away, not because he didn't love her, but because he hadn't proven that his love was real, untainted by the past. He gripped the railing, breathing in the cold night air. He couldn't let her go forever, but this time, he knew he had to do things differently. No impulsive moves or work pressure. He needed to give her time, and more importantly, prove that she, Grace Miller, was the one he loved. Not Elena, not anyone else. In the days after the gala, Grace tried to return to normal. She took on a smaller project at Starline Events, steering clear of anything tied to Hayes Corporation. She met friends, sipped coffee in Williamsburg, even went on a date with a lawyer a friend set her up with. But nothing filled the void Eric left. She hated herself for it, hated that she'd let him seep into her mind, hated that every time the doorbell rang, a small part of her hoped it was him. Eric, meanwhile, stayed out of her sight. He knew she needed space, and he respected that, though every day without her was a struggle. But he didn't stay idle. He began small, subtle gestures to show his feelings. One morning, Grace received a package at her office, a book on event planning with a handwritten note. "Thought you'd like this. You're better than anyone in this industry." E. She stared at the note, her heart racing, but folded it and tucked it into a drawer. trying to convince herself it was just a polite gesture. The next week, a bouquet of white tulips appeared at her apartment door. No sender's name, but she knew who it was. She brought them inside, set them on the kitchen table, and despite herself, smiled at their delicate scent. Eric didn't call, didn't text, didn't push for a response. He just left these small signs as if reminding her he was still there. Waiting, not for Elena, but for her. But Grace held back. She wasn't ready to trust him, not when the fear of being hurt still gripped her. She told herself the gifts, the notes, were just his way of easing guilt, not real love. She needed proof, something bigger, clearer, to break through the wall she'd built around her heart. The turning point came on a rainy evening, 3 weeks after the gala. Grace was working late at Starline Events office, preparing for a small event in Connecticut. She was alone, the neon lights illuminating the room, when her phone rang. It was Linda, her voice urgent. "Grace, we've got a huge problem. The truck carrying equipment for the event crashed on the highway. The driver's fine, but all the stage lights and sound system are ruined. The event's tomorrow and we have no replacements." Grace felt her blood run cold. This was a key event, though smaller than the Hayes Gala, and a failure could damage Starline's reputation. She stood, frantically calling suppliers, partners, anyone who could help. But at 9 p.m., no one had enough equipment for a last-minute delivery. She sank into her chair, cradling her head, a rare sense of helplessness rising. She couldn't let this project fail, not after the emotional storm with Eric, not when she needed to prove she still controlled her life. Then the office doorbell rang. Grace frowned, expecting no one at this hour. She opened the door and there, drenched from the rain, stood Eric Hayes. He wore a black coat, his hair plastered to his forehead, but his eyes lit up when he saw her. In his hand was a folder, and behind him, a small truck with Hayes Corporation's logo was parked outside. "Eric," Grace stammered, her voice trembling with shock. "What are you doing here?" He took a deep breath, his voice steady but firm. "I heard about the crash. Hayes Corporation has spare equipment. Lights, speakers, everything you need. I had it brought here. The truck's outside and my tech team is ready to set up tonight." Grace blinked, incredulous. "How did you know? Who told you?" Eric gave a faint smile, rain dripping from his hair. "I have friends in transportation. They tipped me off as soon as it happened. I know this project matters to you, Grace." He stepped closer, handing her the folder, a detailed list of equipment and a loan agreement, all meticulously prepared. "I'm not here to pressure you. I just want to help. For you." Grace stared at him, emotions flooding her. She wanted to be angry, to say she didn't need him, but the sincerity in his eyes stopped her. He hadn't just shown up. He'd acted, not for his own gain, not for the company, but for her. She took the folder, her hands trembling. "Why, Eric?" she asked, her voice hoarse. "Why are you doing all this?" He looked straight at her, unwavering. "Because I love you, Grace. Not because you're like anyone else. Not because of the past. Because you're you. The strong, brilliant woman who makes me want to be a better man. I know I messed up, but I won't stop trying to prove this is real." His words were a gust, blowing away her defenses. But before she could respond, a loud explosion sounded from the street. They turned to see smoke rising from the Hayes Corporation truck. An employee ran in, panicked. "Mr. Hayes, the truck's short-circuited from the rain. It could catch fire." Eric didn't hesitate. He bolted into the rain, shouting orders to the tech team. "Cut the power! Grab the extinguishers!" Grace followed, her heart pounding. She watched Eric climb onto the truck, heedless of the smoke and rain, helping the crew pull equipment from the danger zone. A fire extinguisher was deployed, and after tense minutes, the flames were out. Eric, soaked and smudged with soot, stood panting, but his eyes remained resolute. Grace stood in the rain, watching him, feeling her heart melt. He hadn't just brought equipment to save her project. He'd risked himself to ensure everyone's safety, to ensure she didn't fail. She stepped toward him, her voice shaky. "Eric, you're insane. You could have gotten hurt." He turned, giving a weak smile. "I'd rather get hurt than let you down, Grace." He paused, then continued, his voice rough. "I know you need time. I'll wait as long as it takes. But I won't stop proving I love you. Not Elena, but Grace Miller." Grace felt her eyes burn, not from the rain. She wanted to say something, but the words caught in her throat. She only nodded, turning away to hide her tears. Eric didn't push, didn't demand an answer. He just stood there in the rain, watching her go, knowing he'd planted a seed of hope. Back at her apartment, Grace sat, clutching the white tulips still on her kitchen table. For the first time, she let herself think of Eric, not with fear, but with a spark of hope. But she wasn't ready yet. She needed time to trust him, to trust herself. Across the city, Eric stood in his office, gazing at New York, feeling like he'd scaled a mountain. He knew the road ahead was long, but for the first time, he believed he had a chance. Not to replace Elena, but to build a future with Grace. 3 weeks had passed since that fateful rainy night when Eric Hayes braved a storm to save Grace Miller's project, proving his love for her was real. New York eased into early summer, the air carrying warmth and the scent of wisteria from the parks. Grace tried to return to her normal routine, but each day she realized she couldn't deny what Eric had done. Not just the white tulips, the book with a handwritten note, or the equipment he brought to rescue her project. It was his eyes, sincere and patient, as if he'd wait a lifetime if needed. She still kept her distance, but the wall around her heart had crumbled, leaving only fragments of fear and pride. One Saturday afternoon, as Grace tidied her desk at Starline Events, a cream-colored envelope slid under her office door. She frowned, picking it up. No sender's name, just a familiar address, Villa 9, Greenwich, Connecticut, where it all began. Inside was a handwritten card, Eric's firm script. Grace, I'm hosting a small gathering at the villa tomorrow night. No work, no pressure. I just want to see you. If you're ready, I'll be waiting. Eric. She read it repeatedly, her fingers tracing the words, her heart racing. She knew this wasn't just an invitation. It was a chance to face him, herself, and everything she'd tried to escape. That evening, Grace stood before her mirror, wearing an emerald silk dress, her hair falling softly over her shoulders. She wasn't sure what she was doing, only that she couldn't keep running. As she drove to Greenwich, a light rain shimmered under the streetlights, echoing their first night. But this time she felt no anger or confusion. She felt hope, however faint. Villa 9 came into view, warm golden light spilling through its large windows. Grace took a deep breath, stepped onto the stone path, her heels clicking softly. The door opened before she could knock, and there stood Eric, in a white shirt and black trousers, holding a single red rose. The sharpness of a CEO was gone, replaced by a sincerity that made her want to believe he'd truly changed. Grace, he said, his voice low, his eyes lighting up as he saw her. You came. She smiled, though her heart pounded. I couldn't say no to a handwritten invite, she replied, half teasing, but her eyes stayed on him. Eric gave a soft laugh, offering her the rose. I was hoping you wouldn't. He led her inside, and this time, the villa wasn't cold like that first night. The living room was simple but cozy, with flickering candles on the table and a small fireplace crackling. A modest dinner was set, but no one else was there, just the two of them. No party? Grace asked, raising an eyebrow, clutching the rose. Eric shrugged, his eyes twinkling. I stretched the truth a bit. I just wanted you here, not for work or anyone else. She laughed, truly at ease with him for the first time, and the feeling was like a cool breeze through her heart. They sat down, dining by candlelight, talking about simple things, favorite New York coffee shops, the comedy film that left Grace in stitches, or the time Eric burned his kitchen trying to cook. But as dinner ended, the air grew heavier, as if both knew the pivotal moment was near. Eric stood, walking to the large window overlooking the garden, where rain glistened under the moonlight. Grace followed, standing a few steps away, waiting. Grace, he began, his voice rough, not turning around. I was wrong. That night, when I saw Elena in you, I let the past cloud the present. But you're not her. You're Grace. Strong, brilliant, witty, the woman who made me laugh for the first time in 2 years. You're the only one I want. Not because you're like anyone else, but because you're you. Grace's chest tightened, tears welling but held back. She stepped closer, her voice trembling. Eric, I'm scared. I'm scared I'm just part of the past you're clinging to. How do I know this is real? Eric turned, his eyes blazing with resolve. Because I've spent every day since that night proving it. I didn't bring her here, Grace. I didn't think of her when I brought you flowers, when I helped your project, when I stood in the rain to make sure you didn't fail. I thought of you, how you challenge me, how you work like the world depends on it, how you make me want to be a better man. He paused, stepping closer, so near she could feel his warmth. I love you, Grace Miller. Only you. His words were a wave, washing away her lingering doubts. Grace searched his eyes for any hint of deceit, but found only a sincerity that melted her heart. She took a deep breath, then whispered, I'm scared too, Eric, but I love you. Eric froze as if he couldn't believe his ears. Then he smiled, a radiant grin that made him look younger, lighter. He reached out, gently touching her cheek as if she were the most precious thing in the world. Can I kiss you? He asked, his voice hoarse. And Grace laughed, tears streaming down her face. You still have to ask? She replied, pulling him close. Under New York's starry sky, shimmering through the large window, they shared a tender kiss, unhurried, unlike that desperate first night. This kiss was a promise, a beginning. Grace felt her heart fully open for the first time, free of the past shadow. Her strength intertwined with Eric's healing heart, like two final puzzle pieces finding their place. 3 months later, Grace and Eric stood in a small Lower East Side gallery, hosting a charity event for underprivileged children. It wasn't as grand as the Hayes Corporation Gala, but it held deep meaning for them both. Grace, in a beige business dress, directed the team with her usual confidence. But this time, she wasn't alone. Eric, in a rolled-up shirt, helped her arrange chairs, chatted with sponsors, and even brewed coffee for the crew late at night. They worked as a team, their respect and love evident in stolen glances, shared smiles, and gentle touches. As the event ended, volunteers applauded, thanking Grace and Eric for a meaningful evening. Grace took the stage, her brief speech filled with emotion. Thank you all for being here. This event isn't just about raising funds. It's about giving hope. And I know a little about hope, thanks to someone who taught me that sometimes you have to take a risk to find it. She looked at Eric standing below, and he smiled, his eyes shining like stars. After the guests left, Grace and Eric stayed to clean up. They laughed, racing to see who could stack chairs faster, like playful kids. When done, they stepped outside under the streetlights, the summer air warm around them. You killed it, Miller, Eric said, pulling her into his arms. I bet no one throws a charity event and makes it this fun. Grace laughed, resting her head on his chest. I had a decent partner, she replied, looking up at him. But next time, you're letting me win the chair stacking race. Eric chuckled, kissing her forehead, and in that moment, they knew they'd found a home in each other. They returned to Villa 9 one weekend, not for a party, but to make it their own. With Grace's help, Eric cleared the room once filled with painful memories, replacing them with new photos of them, their weekend trips, their moments of laughter. Elena's picture was carefully stored in a box, not to forget, but to honor the past and move forward. One evening, as they sat by the fireplace, Grace leaned on Eric's shoulder, a book in hand. You know, she said softly, I used to think this villa was the worst place in the world. Eric turned, raising an eyebrow. And now? She smiled, meeting his gaze. Now it's where I found you. Eric pulled her into a kiss, and the villa, once a place of sorrow, now brimmed with laughter and hope. They made no grand promises, no flowery vows. Their love was built on truth, on healed scars, mutual respect, and the belief that no matter how the world changed, they would always choose